I just wish we could all be together in one space, because that's always better. So today I'm going to talk to you about two things that are of great importance to me. Why I think nature plays an important role in our changing world, and what I think landscape architects can accomplish toward reducing emissions, sustaining nature, and improving well-being. I'm going to talk to you about how specifically you can contribute and why I think it's your job and my job. So I'm assuming, and from looking at everybody before we started up, that most of you are students of landscape architecture. And just starting on this adventure that this career offers. So the presentation is largely to you as students, and to tell you a bit about my own journey and how I ended up being the International Federation of Landscape Architects delegate to the World Council of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, among other things. So there we are. Look at us. The Guelph MLA class of '87, my class. And like that class, I'm pretty sure you all come from different places and different backgrounds and different cultures. But for some reason, you picked landscape architecture. Some of you may not be able to keep a houseplant alive. He can't. And some of you can't draw stick figures. Some of you love nature. Your reasons for picking this career path will be as individual as you are. For me, it all started with a chicken. I grew up in Gander on the island of Newfoundland. It's a small mid-century modern town, which in the 50s was this isolated little Silicon Valley in the middle of the boreal forest. In those days, Gander was the site of a massive international airport. It was the hub for transatlantic flights to, well, everywhere in the world. But aside from airplanes and a train service, there weren't even any roads in and out of Gander. So to make ends meet for a couple of years, my dad raised chickens so he could sell the eggs. I didn't care much about the eggs, but I got to have a pet chicken, and I loved my chicken. That chicken episode appears to have been a seminal period of my life. I met the world's first cosmonaut when I was only 10 years old. Actors, world leaders, the Queen, they all went through Gander. I grew up with a fascination with airplanes and the technology that made flight possible, and with a deep understanding of how small the world really is. And because middle of nowhere, I also grew up in a stunningly beautiful environment of forests, lakes, and coasts. I grew up with a deep love of nature. When I went to university, I studied aquatic and then marine biology. I kind of got over chickens. And like my fishing ancestors, I sailed up the coast of Labrador on research vessels chasing icebergs. I graduated with my master's in science, and I began working as an assessment ecologist on the impacts of hydroelectric development and offshore oil development, and lots of work on aquaculture and stream health. Lots of time on boats and underwater, and I learned that the problems in the oceans were coming from the humans on the land. So I went back to school to become a landscape architect because a friend said to me it would be better for me than engineering. I wanted to try to bridge that gap between the built and the natural environment. And for the last 30 years, I've planned and designed and built stuff. Some of the things I worked on were pretty mundane, like parking lots. Mind you, a badly designed supermarket parking lot still gets on my nerves. But I also got to work with First Nations and clean up industrial sites and abandoned mine and work with jets at Air Command because, you know, you grew up in Gander, you love jets. And there were parks work, including national parks and coastal industry and highways and bridges and just lots of different kinds of stuff. Landscape architecture is intensive work, but everything I was doing was so interesting. I didn't pay a lot of attention to what was actually going around me. And my first 20 years just kind of flew by. But conditions in the rivers and the lakes and along the coasts in Canada were still steadily deteriorating, and no one was paying much attention. And when I stopped and looked around me, I could see it. And I couldn't see where I was making a difference, not a difference for the better anyway. So I went back to school, and yeah, going back to school is definitely a recurring pattern with me. And I did a PhD at Dalhousie in interdisciplinary studies, coasts and management, and then a postdoc on coastal and oceans health. I wanted to find out if the health of our coasts in Canada was going downhill and why planning and design and development and coastal management remained such a challenge. And why, as landscape architects, we didn't seem to be doing enough about the continuing degradation of the natural environment. And to be fair, this isn't only happening in Canada. I've been working in sustainability since 1990. And I really wish I could tell you that we've made great progress. But the truth is, throughout the entire world, ecosystems have been deteriorating, and some of them drastically. We've consistently failed to make that connection between the things humans do and the immediate and cumulative impacts on the natural environment. We've scraped off the topsoil, we've deforested the land, we've filled the wetlands, we've piped the streams, we've polluted and eradicated ecosystems, habitats, and species. We have literally paved paradise. In the past 50 years, humans have changed ecosystems faster and more extensively than during any other period of human history. So you all know the planet is warming, right? Well, aside from the inconvenience to humans, are you aware of what global warming is doing? Yes, it's melting glaciers and it's raising sea levels, and storms are getting bigger and more frequent. But planetary warming is also affecting planetary ecosystems. It's changing those delicately balanced in-out processes, altering food chains, stressing out species and habitats. Nature can absorb some change. It's pretty resilient. But as the level of and it remains sustainable. But as the level of change increases, the system starts to show signs of impact. Sometimes if you can take away those stressors, everything will bounce back to the way it was. Or they may alter a bit, and not always in a bad way. And this goes on until you reach something that we call a threshold. The threshold is the point at which ecological systems, habitats, and species stop being able to absorb impacts. If you go past these thresholds, things really start to deteriorate. We lose habitats, we lose species. Food chains get badly out of whack. Even if you stop stressing the system, there's no guarantee those systems will recover or they can recover. This is where the red lights and the sirens start to go off. When ecosystems continue to deteriorate, they can reach these tipping points, the point of no return. Past this point, deterioration will continue, and there's nothing you can do about it or slow this or stop even the degradation. Things will change from where they had been to something different. And that might not be a state of affairs that's good for humans. One of those tipping points in ecosystems for the planet is global warming. The tipping point that's been identified is a warming of 2.5 degrees Celsius above where global mean temperatures would normally sit. We are projected to hit that change by 2030 or sooner. Right now, today, our climate is in crisis, and in many places, ecosystems, habitats, and species are in crisis. We used to have 10 years. Now we've got 9 years to try to get greenhouse gas emission levels down, to reduce the amount of CO2 and other GHGs in our atmosphere. After 2030, it may very well be too late to stop the warming process. The world will continue to warm even if we eliminate greenhouse gas emissions entirely. The blue represents anticipated changes if we dramatically reduced our emissions. Well, we all know that's not happening. Even with COVID, that's not really happening. The pink represents what happens if emissions continue at current levels. And the top end of that range is where we really are tracking. We will potentially warm the Earth by 5 degrees by 2100. And after 2100, things will really start to go bad. Because this is a hockey stick graph. The scientists, and oftentimes you'll see it stops at 2100. But things don't stop there. They just keep going on, sometimes logarithmically. And after 2100, if we don't get this under control, our planet's going to go places that we currently have no capacity to understand. While I was doing my PhD at Dalhousie, I got to spend some time with the Telfer School of Management at the University of Ottawa. So we all participate in management when you do project management or policy management or development management, but there's actually an entire discipline devoted to management science. I was part of a team at that time from 5 universities that started working on the effects of climate change on coastal communities. sea level rise and severe storms. This was 2009. Not many people were really getting active in climate change at that time. So for 5 years, the Sea Change Project in Canada and the Caribbean worked with 8 coastal communities, all the way from Iqaluit down to Georgetown in Guyana. From Arctic shores to tropical beaches, planning and adapting to climate change is all about working with landscapes and communities and what happens when the world we depend on changes. Access to drinking water, impacts of thawing permafrost, what happens to tourism when the coral reefs and the beaches are gone. So since 2009, when I started in climate change work, I have used every attribute and every skill of my training in landscape architecture. But the one I used most of all is our skill in communication. Now, I love my hard hat, and I deeply miss it. It sits right above my desk, gathering dust, and some days I just put it on and walk around for a bit. I miss the creativity and the challenge of the planning and design process. I miss building stuff, but in the past 10 years, I've learned that I can achieve a lot by talking to people and convincing them to change their perspective and their practice, to take action, which is exactly what I'm doing here today. Communication is a skill that landscape architects are actually taught. We are taught how to put an idea on paper or on a computer screen. We are taught how to transfer that idea in our head into something someone else can appreciate and understand. We learn how to engage people and to gain their trust so they'll give us the resources to build that thing we can see in our head. My pal Martha Schwartz says that communication is a landscape architect's superpower. Martha also says landscape architects are not just great talkers, we're also great listeners, because we need to understand all the issues associated with the work we do at all the scales appropriate to those sites, from large landscapes to small pocket parks. We learn to listen to other disciplines, to scientists, to what Lawrence Stasiuk at the City of Hamilton calls subject matter experts. They can be ecologists, sociologists, First Nations people, maintenance workers, tradespeople. Each person brings a unique perspective and a unique knowledge that is inherently valuable when you're forming a plan or laying out a design. Another one of my pals, Jane Welsh with the City of Toronto, talks about the richness a landscape architect brings to the resolution of issues, because we listen and we make ourselves understand and we incorporate all those complicated issues and opportunities that are inherent in every adventure in planning and design. We don't just create aesthetic spaces. We fix problems, we enhance ecosystems, we advance prosperity, and we make society and environments sustainable and beautiful and well-loved. Our superpower is learned at school and honed by experience and must be used for good. Your career will present many opportunities for you to use your superpower, and not all of those opportunities will come to you through your day job. You can speak out in your community. You can participate in planning and development advisory boards. You can join conservation associations. And you can also volunteer to assist your profession in making this world a better place. This is a pathway, a journey that is open to every landscape architect with a passion. And I think a lot of you in this school have got a lot of passion, and you wouldn't have signed on for this lecture if you didn't. My own journey in the profession began with a really small step. Back in the early 90s, fresh out of school, I volunteered for something or another with APALA, the Atlantic Provinces Association of Landscape Architects. I went on eventually to become APALA president, then our representative to the board of directors of the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects. And then a few years later, I was elected national president of the CSLA. Truth be told is I had really missed all the friends I had made across the country through my work with CSLA. In 2014, while working on Sea Change, I was asked to be program chair for the first CSLA Congress to focus on climate change, and then to chair a CSLA task force on climate change, which a few years later morphed into the CSLA National Committee on Climate Adaptation, which is going gangbusters today under Jane Welsh's leadership. In 2017, I was nominated as the chair of the International Federation of Landscape Architects Working Group on Climate Change. And this past September, I was nominated and elected as chair of the IFLA Committee on Professional Practice and Policy. I now sit on the executive committee of our international federation. It didn't take very long. It was a very easy path, and it's a path that's open to all of you. So let me tell you a little bit about how your federation is using our global voice to make the world a better place. IFLA is a not-for-profit, non-political, non-governmental organization. We are a federation of 77 national professional organizations organized in 5 world regions. Now think about that for a minute. There are only 195 countries in the world, and 77 of them have national associations of landscape architects, and they are members of the IFLA World Council. If you are a licensed landscape architect in one of those countries, a member of your national association, you are a part of IFLA. IFLA has the potential to reach out to every landscape architect in the world. So how can landscape architects spread their values for a new world to do their colleagues in other professions, to their clients, to their societies? How do we reach out to like-minded organizations and find new ways for collaborative effort that achieves real change in the way the world works? IFLA has identified a series of global issues that are of immediate importance to the profession of landscape architecture. All of these are interrelated. None of them stand on their own. For the past few years, we've been working on how we advance change on all of them. How do we make a difference? How do we contribute? We decided to go back to the basics and to advocate for change within our own profession first. We framed a set of principles. Now, these are not new principles that promote enhancing resilience, supporting the capacity for positive transformation, and that commit us to renewed efforts to sustain environments and societies. In May of 2017, the Executive Council of IFLA, Executive Committee of IFLA, ratified the IFLA Global Accord. Within 2 months, the Global Accord had been ratified by every one of the national associations of the World Council. The Global Accord is a simple 2-page document that unites these 3 principles as a guide for planning and design in the 21st century. Be resilient, be transformative, be sustainable. Resilience is the capacity of social, economic, and environmental systems to cope with a hazard event or trend or disturbance. Responding or reorganizing in ways that maintain their essential function, identity, and structure. Enhancing resilience better prepares ecosystems and communities for the changes to come, making sure not only that they can survive, but that they can prosper. Some of you may recognize the killick on the left there. It's a Newfoundland answer to an interrupted supply chain. Generations ago, in remote and isolated fishing communities along the Newfoundland coast, people were faced with an often hostile environment, limited access to manufactured goods, and a need to keep fishing or starve. It was a big deal to lose your steel boat anchor. And it could be months before you could get access to a new one, waiting for the coastal steamer to arrive with supplies. So Newfoundlanders drew from their heritage, and they made replacement anchors from roots, trees, and rocks. Killicks get the job done, and they're a great example of how people can rely on their own abilities and the resources the environment provides to help them through difficult times. My killick, it's only a replica. It sits on my desk to remind me to use what I have to be resilient in the face of challenge. Someone, I can't find who, has said that in the next 40 years, we will build more infrastructure throughout the world than we have in the last 4,000. So why not build it better? Why not dream now and create those magnificent cities of the future? Why not rethink all of our services, transportation, food, water, wastewater, shelter? If we have to refit, build, adapt, and change, why not use those resources to build those ingenious, creative, mystical communities we see in Star Trek and on Guardians of the Galaxy? Why not make them real? We need to find new solutions, sometimes to problems that may now be on the horizon, but all too quickly will be a way of life. We need to innovate, to transform, to create. And it's not enough to do what we do well. We must do what we've never done before, and then we must do it better. Look at this structure. You all know what this is, the Sydney Opera House. It opened in 1973. It opened in 1973. I was just graduating with my bachelor's degree. I was wearing love beads. There were no desktop computers, no digitizing pads, no graphing calculators, no CAD. And they built this. So I figure we've got the jump on being creative in our time. Sustainability is about more than sustaining ecosystems and the services they provide. We need forests to sequester carbon and provide oxygen to shelter us and provide renewable building materials. We need wetlands that can clean our water to buffer our floods and to protect our shores. Sustainability is also about ensuring that communities and societies prosper, that the financial base remains solvent, that even the most disadvantaged are cared for, and that we're open and eager for new opportunities. In 2019, IFLA committed its members to supporting the UN Goals for Sustainable Development, and we're now part of a global contract working to ensure progress on these goals. These 17 simple goals provide a pathway toward the creation of a better, more sustainable world. In my new roles within the Federation, I'll be working with landscape architects literally from all over the world to make sure we're doing everything we can to advance these goals. Now let's just take a look at some of the things that IFLA is doing on goal 13, climate action. So climate change is a multifaceted, challenging, ever-changing problem. Sea level rise, overland flooding, shoreline erosion, drought, wildfires, displacement of population, stress. Each of these on their own are wicked problems, sticky, thorny issues, complex, trickled-down problems, difficult to isolate problems, hard to resolve problems, ever-changing problems. There are no simple solutions for wicked problems. They cross disciplines, jurisdictions, environments, and neighborhoods. They damage property, affect public safety, and they can hurt people. Wicked problems can have unforeseen outcomes. There will be unknown unknowns. There's hardly ever one right solution to a wicked problem because those conditions keep changing, evolving. We will need a plan A and a plan B and a plan C, and our responses will have to be nimble and flexible. Wicked problems are not solved by a single discipline. For wicked problems, we need all hands on deck. We are past time when fixing a flood meant calling an engineer and building a higher seawall or dike. Now our first question might be, do we want or need a dike? Increasingly, decision makers are seeing value in interdisciplinary teams. They can include planners, engineers, landscape architects, ecologists, geomorphologists, hydrologists, sociologists, economists, accountants. It goes on and on and on. They are as different from multidisciplinary teams as hockey teams are from relay teams. In a relay team, you do your piece and you're done. In hockey teams, it's a constant passing of the puck to the other player who's better positioned to score the goal. This is the meaning of interdisciplinarity. You come, you participate, you learn. Your perspective and your contribution is enriched by the perspectives and contributions of your colleagues. In landscape architects, we're not just good at partnering with these other disciplines and learning from them. We're also really good leaders. And interdisciplinary teams require good leaders, roles we're uniquely skilled to take on. But as the climate change and the pandemic soars, we need to be strong. Adaptation teams will need to make difficult decisions, and some of those decisions will result in heartbreak, whether that's for a town or neighborhood, a family, or a person. It'll still be heartbreak, and it'll be difficult. John Holden was Obama's advisory on science and health, and he said it best way back in 2009. We basically have three choices left: mitigation, adaptation, and suffering, and we're going to do some of each. The question is what the mix is going to be. The more mitigation we do, the less adaptation will be required and the less suffering there will be. So how are we addressing these issues at IFLA? Recognizing the looming crisis in the world's ecosystems and societies, in September of 2019, the IFLA World Council declared a climate and biodiversity emergency. We understood the challenges facing us and the need for action today to protect the environments and the people of tomorrow. The declaration affirms our commitment to a significant long-term shift in thinking, behavior, and in policy and practice in our profession. In 2019, the IFLA World Council also committed our profession to action on climate change, to reducing our contributions to emissions, to protecting nature, the best hope for stabilizing planetary systems, and to preparing communities for disaster from intensifying weather, extreme heat, cold, floods, drought, and famine. I'm going to highlight just a couple of the elements of the action plan. First, this emphasis on how every little bit counts, how even the smallest action that you take can have widespread outcomes when we each contribute. We as landscape architects must first commit to reducing our own emissions and to lowering the carbon footprint of our work. We must do everything we can to stop cutting trees. We must work with our suppliers to examine the carbon footprint for the materials we specify, because some of them have quite a high carbon footprint. And we must question the decisions we make and our own behavior. The second component of the action plan is to love every leaf. We must protect the wild we have left, including all those spaces in rural and urban communities. We must value every tree we have, and we must plant more. Afforestation is not reforestation. We have to plant trees where no trees now exist. We must promote Nature for All. Nature for All is a major program of the IUCN. Now, some of you may know the IUCN is the organization that produces the red list of species that have become extinct or about to become extinct, but the IUCN does this, but it does so much more. The IUCN is like this science base that does all of the research and all of the things that we're concerned about as landscape architects. In 2016, I became a volunteer scientist member of the IUCN Commission on Ecosystem Management. At the urging of one of my oldest friends, who's this amazing environmental scientist, works all over the world to protect nature, Dr. Liette Vasseur at Brock. Liette had a plan. She always has a plan. And my becoming a member was a first step toward her real goal. I didn't know this at the time. Liette chairs, she's a deputy chair of this Commission on Ecosystem Management, and her plan was to make IFLA and landscape architects members of the IUCN World Council. So after a lengthy and complex process, IFLA was accepted in January of this year, and I am now that voting delegate for IFLA to the IUCN. And I can't tell you, this is cool. This is really, really, really cool. Last week, together with IFLA President Jim Hayter and other colleagues, we voted as landscape architects on 120 IUCN motions that dealt with sustainability, forest renewal, clean water, urban design, ecosystem protection. It's really, really cool. Nature for All is a core program in the IUCN, and it focuses on the belief that a personal experience of nature is necessary in order for us to value nature, to really value nature. I've known this for years. Remember my chicken? A personal experience with nature can lead you to that love of nature that stays with you throughout your life and affects every decision you make as a landscape architect. Our love of nature translates into having a higher valuation of natural environments, for parks, for green spaces, for river shores and ocean beaches. And it leads us to the understanding that access to nature should be the right of every citizen of the globe. A love of nature can also inspire municipal authorities to value the natural assets that they hold as they value economic and infrastructure assets. IFLA is committed to advancing understanding of the role played by natural assets, to valuing and protecting these assets wherever they might be located, and to working towards their sustainable use and management. IFLA believes that landscape architects truly are the stewards of our environment, and that we are the architects for nature. Interestingly, so does the IUCN. One of the newest approaches to planning and design partners natural assets with built infrastructure to ensure that the greatest benefits are accrued to both at the lowest possible cost. Nature-based solutions are providing new and pragmatic means to reduce impacts from severe weather, to reduce energy demands, and to provide renewable energy options. They're also being used to capture a wide range of co-benefits to both natural systems and human populations. These are just a few of the elements of the IFLA Climate Action Plan. We're also working on disaster resilience and on transforming our communities to better equip them for that changing future. I often, when I speak, get asked, but how do I find the information I need to know what I need to know about climate change? And some people suggest that we need a website where someone else has gathered up all the information and summarized it and provided the links and done all the hard work for us so that we can then just go on the website and find what we need. Well, the problem is that science and knowledge on climate and climate change is changing at a horrendous pace. And the resources required to keep such a website up would be enormous, and it wouldn't all possibly help you if you were designing a small park in Gander, Newfoundland. But there are a huge number of tools. The Climate Atlas of Canada is one of those newer tools that's come online. The Atlas can provide information that's specific to a particular community, where things will likely get wetter or warmer or colder in our country. And if you want or need more specific information, you can always pick up the phone and call the weather office. One of the things that writing the primers taught me is that scientists in both government and academia are keen to talk to people they think will use the information they've generated, and they will help you a lot. And if you want to read more on what's happening in Canada, NRCan's climate adaptation team has a terrific set of reports that explain the science of climate change in clear, precise, and useful language. They explain what we can expect in Canada and where the impacts are likely to accrue. Check their sites often because there are always new reports coming out. Oops. There are other relevant reference materials, tools, and best practice guides, and all of them are freely available. These are materials that help you decide what you can do about adaptation. Some of the larger communities in Canada have teams working on climate change, and especially on the community engagement that's needed to make these options palatable and successful. And most of this information is readily transferable to local situations, to smaller communities and different environments. We don't need to reinvent the wheel or expend resources repeating work someone else has already done and done well. We need to share our own work with others across the country, and we need to share the work of landscape architects, because seeing what other people are doing can inspire you to do something equally creative. Once you enter into the world of climate adaptation, you should also reflect on the importance of language. We need to speak clearly, and we need to use the words that resonate well within our communities. We need to communicate. Again, by example, the language on adaptation to sea level rise and coastal flooding and erosion began with approaches labeled do nothing, protect, accommodate, retreat. Some even used attack, defend, retreat. These terms were developed by climate scientists and ocean scientists, and I don't think they translate well into community planning, design, or management. And they especially don't translate well when flooding isn't the climate issue of concern. They don't help you see how you can create a better community. And no mayor or council I have ever met with wants to defend a do nothing or retreat approach, right? Language is important because it helps people understand not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it. So in the primers, we rework the language. Defer becomes a conscious decision that this is not the time to take action. Maybe action isn't needed yet. Maybe there's insufficient time. Maybe there's insufficient resources. Revisit later. Persist is any action that allows infrastructure and human activities to remain in the same location. Persist may have a time limit. Even retrofit actions or protective measures like seawalls and dikes may be time limited in effectiveness. Migrate offers a much more positive approach to moving away from hazardous conditions towards a safer location with a more positive future. Let's talk about adaptation options for a bit. I'm going to use coastal flooding and adaptation as an example because that's mostly where I work. Traditionally, most coastal protection was built infrastructure, gray adaptation, seawalls, dikes, stormwater pipe upgrades. Increasingly, we're becoming more aware of the benefits of working with natural assets, wetlands, salt marshes, lakes, dune complexes, green adaptation. But unless we change policy, establish practices, legal instruments, and even purchasing processes, it can be impossible to advance softer green adaptation options in a timely and effective manner. So generally, most projects looking at what we're going to do to protect shorelines need a combination of all three of these adaptation approaches. And one of the biggest challenges for our profession in adaptation is to ensure that ugly is not one of the design criteria. There's no reason for ugly to be the default position we have to accept to ensure that something we build will do the job it needs to do. There really are better approaches, and it's up to our profession to ensure that the society we seek to serve knows this. Not all adaptation is good adaptation. We need to make sure that adaptation efforts are appropriate within the context of the site. I drove by this house 2 years ago in PEI on the North Shore. It's definitely ready for sea level rise and storm surge, but this place is way up the hill and it's miles inland from the ocean. See right there? That little, that's the ocean, way down the hill from where this house is located. If there was sea level rise or storm surge flooding here, it would mean the PEI was mostly underwater. So the people who built this house are safe, but this adaptation is over the top and neither practical nor effective. Adaptation can be artful. Thinking outside the box, in BC, the Sangala LA firm is building seawalls that look like art installations in the landscape. They're proving that we can work with nature, not against it. At Crowbush Cove in PEI, where the coastlines are eroding at a rate of a foot or more a year, even without sea level rise, Coldwaller Consulting worked on dune restoration projects that used a combination of engineered armor stone topped with a regenerated and stabilized dune grass system. Now, that's not just planting grass, that was ecologically researched and established. Natural vegetation can produce the potential for erosion along shores and rivers, wetlands, marshes, and dune complexes when protected and sustained. They can withstand heavy precipitation, higher flow velocities, and storm surges. And while salt marshes have the capacity to attenuate near-shore wave energy and reduce the effect of eroding longshore currents, they may not be enough on their own. So dune restoration projects and dike enhancements are relying on this combination of engineering underpinning and natural environment and ecosystem to get the job done, while at the same time providing amenities to the community. In Richmond, BC, the plans for shoreline protection, because it's a really low-lying area, combines artificially created offshore reefs and islands, as well as nearshore wetlands and salt marshes that actually protect the foot of the dikes that run along the edge of commercial and residential properties. As water levels increase from sea level rise, the offshore islands may in fact become offshore reefs, underwater reefs, but they'll still break wave energy before it reaches the dike. Even the smallest landscapes can be used to reduce stormwater flow and increase the neighborhood amenities, as in this example from Toronto, where bioswales along residential streets attenuate peak stormwater during cloudburst conditions. And also in Toronto, natural environments are forming a significant component of the Great Lakes shoreline restorations taking place on previously degraded industrial sites. If you take care when you size riprap to create the crevices needed for nature, you can improve habitat conditions for nearshore and species and habitats, and create really, really cool places to snorkel or dive or kayak or walk, even in a city. Erosion of the bluffs along Lake Ontario's shorelines is increasing due to higher water levels and higher wave activities. And you can see this kind of thing here. But instead of concrete walls, the city opted for a multi-benefit strategy that uses recreated beaches to reduce wave access to the bluffs and provide amenities. Changing lake levels in Ontario can be higher or lower in any given year right now. All of these norms are changing and they will continue to change. So we need to be creative moving forward. In BC, where sea level rise and river rise funding is on the increase, the Port of Vancouver is completing this really interesting shoreline restoration project right in the middle of one of Canada's biggest cities again. The Brighton Park shoreline is being restored with regenerated salt marshes, a new creek estuary, woodlands, and recreation space, right next to a shipping pier, a major rail line, and a transportation corridor. The project stabilized the shoreline, created lots of recreational space, and even the salmon are starting to come back. So in Canada and throughout the world, landscape architects were getting on a good path, really a great path, in melding nature and human society, rewilding the city and doing a more sustainable job in rural communities and landscapes. And then came COVID, and the world went into seclusion, and societies and economies shut down, and everything changed almost overnight. And now, 9 months later, COVID is still with us, and even with the emerging vaccines, it will be for months to come. The challenges from severe weather and climate change that we faced in 2019 are still there, but now they include a global pandemic. In addition to the tragic loss of family members, COVID has ruptured economies, interrupted the supply chains for goods and services, and added the stress and strife of individuals and populations. Global warming was a crisis of unimaginable, unknowable scale. COVID has only added to that complexity. As we continue to struggle with the pandemic, we're learning to continue to function. In fact, the pandemic has strengthened our resolve to do more and to do it now. COVID has proven that pandemics not only can occur across the globe, they will occur, and we need to be better prepared. COVID has also shown us how resilient we already are, how much we can accomplish from the kitchen tables and basements of the world. Today, I'm in my home in Ottawa, where I've been, like most Canadians, for 9 months now. But daily I meet with colleagues in landscape architecture, not just across our vast nations, but from their homes all across the world. From basements and kitchen tables, much work continues. In masks and gloves, much can be done when we venture out. Wherever we are, don't focus on what you can't do. Look instead on the opportunities we have to do great things. We can do more to reach out, to communicate, and to support from our homes, and even to act from those kitchen tables. Technology has ensured that COVID has not trapped us, it's actually empowered us. I believe that as the world changes, as we become more aware of the value of natural assets and the need for nature-based solutions, and our dependency on global food chains, global supply chains, global travel, we are entering a golden age for landscape architecture. Landscape architects can be the engines that inspires change in social behavior. We can use our superpower to convince decision makers that what is possible is also practical, and that what is practical must also sustain environments, ecosystems, and societies. We can create that future that is techier, cooler, healthier, and we can make it an exciting journey. At the CSLA, we're working on next year's Congress in Ottawa in May of 2021. This Congress will focus on nature-based solutions, on a green recovery for a great recovery. My pal Martha will open the Congress talking about her work to reduce the levels of greenhouse gases and to design now for a new world. Maud Barlow, who was formerly with the Council of Canadians, will talk about her work to advance the global right to clean water and what that entails, even here in Canada. The call for abstracts for the Congress is now open, and we are busy working out all the kinks to make the Congress virtual, even with virtual tours that you can participate in online, tours that will take place all over the country and highlight the work of landscape architects from one end of our country to the other. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to see you online if that's our only option. The beauty of our profession is that it opens the doors for many career paths. There are great adventures waiting you in planning and design of cities and communities at all scales and locations. But don't limit your dreams to urban design. Consider ecological conservation. Seek out positions that enable you to draft progressive policy for planning and development. Voice your talents and your insights within organizations and government. Use your superpower for good. Find people you admire, people you respect, people who challenge you to be more than you thought you were. These are just a few of the people in IFLA and in CSLA from all around the world and from here in Canada that are working on the challenges I talked about today. Every one of them is a landscape architect. Every one of them is a volunteer. The voice of our profession is strong in Canada and growing stronger. The voice of our profession is strong across the world and growing stronger. We are using our superpower for good. Thank you so much for listening to my voice for so long. And now it would be great to hear from some of you.